Darren had always known his assignment to the distant planet of Orioles would be challenging. As a diplomat representing Earth in the intergalactic peace efforts, he often found himself navigating not just cultural differences, but the immense weight of political decisions. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the request he received one afternoon. It came from none other than Princess Elijah, the daughter of the planet's ruler. The royal palace was grand, far more impressive than the sterile diplomatic offices where Darren usually worked. It was filled with towering statues of ancient kings, sprawling gardens, and an air of authority that made the whole place feel alive with history. When Elijah arrived, her presence was commanding. Though young, she held herself with the grace of someone much older, her eyes sharp, calculating, and full of purpose. "Darren, I need your help," she began, her voice calm but laced with urgency. Darren looked up from the papers in front of him, surprised by the sudden intrusion. The princess had always been a figure of curiosity, but this was the first time she had sought him out personally. "Of course, Princess Elijah. What is it that you need?" She stepped forward, a slight tension in her posture. "It's about my mother, Queen Allura. She needs a partner and I need a father. I believe you're the one who can help us." Her words hung in the air, strange and impossible to immediately comprehend. Darren blinked, uncertain if he had heard correctly. The request felt too personal, too political, and frankly, too strange. "I'm not sure I understand. You want me to marry the Queen?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, that's exactly it. Marry her and help lead the galaxy." The words were blunt, and Darren couldn't help but stare at her for a moment. His mind raced, trying to process the gravity of what she was asking. He had spent years working on peace treaties, forging alliances, and even brokering small-scale agreements, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of request. "Why me?" he finally asked. "I'm a human diplomat far from royalty. I don't know the ways of your people, let alone how to lead a galaxy." Princess Elijah took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "That's exactly why you're needed. The galaxy is on the edge of collapse, Darren. My mother has led us for years, but her leadership is faltering. She is surrounded by rivals, factions vying for control. Without a partner, she cannot hold the empire together. And I, as her daughter, am not seen as strong enough to lead alone." Darren shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The weight of her words settled on him like a heavy cloak. He had heard rumors of political instability on Orioles, but he hadn't imagined things were this dire. Yet, despite the pressure building, he couldn't ignore the sincerity in Elijah's eyes. This wasn't just a matter of political maneuvering. The princess was desperate. "Your mother," Darren began, trying to find the right words. "What does she think of this idea?" Elijah's expression faltered for a split second, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her otherwise composed demeanor. "She doesn't know that I'm here speaking to you, but she trusts me, and she knows that the future of our people depends on her finding a suitable partner. I've studied your work, your strategies, your mind. I believe you are the one who can help us." Darren leaned back in his chair, processing her words. A marriage of convenience. He had seen such things in politics before, but this was different. This was no ordinary alliance. This was about leading a galaxy. The weight of her request was heavy, and Darren wondered if he was ready to shoulder it. "I don't know," Darren said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I came here to help foster peace, not to rule a kingdom." But Elijah didn't let him retreat. "Peace requires stability, Darren, and stability requires leadership. Queen Allura is a great ruler, but she is one person against a galaxy full of political unrest. She needs a partner to help her govern, someone who can unite the factions and restore balance." Darren looked up, meeting her gaze. He could see the fire in her eyes, the unspoken hope that burned there. He could see how much she cared for her mother, and how much she believed in the possibility of peace. It wasn't just about politics, it was about the future of countless lives across the galaxy. "What if I don't want to marry your mother?" he asked, testing her resolve. For the first time, a flicker of frustration passed across Elijah's face. Then we all lose. The galaxy, the people, and my mother. This isn't a request from a princess to a diplomat. This is a plea from a daughter who is watching her mother's rule crumble. You don't have to love her, Darren. You just need to help us save the galaxy. The weight of her words pressed down on Darren like a 1,000-pound stone. He had never wanted power, never wanted to lead anything beyond the role he had been given. Yet here he was, faced with a decision that could change the fate of an entire galaxy. Elijah's voice softened, almost pleading. Please, help us. For her, for me, for everyone. Darren stood, pacing the room. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The offer was unimaginable, yet in some strange way it felt like fate. It was clear that Queen Allura's leadership was in jeopardy, and Elijah, despite her strength, was just a daughter in need of someone to save her mother's throne. He turned back to Elijah. I'll need time to think this over. I can't make such a decision lightly. Elijah nodded, her face a mixture of hope and desperation. Take all the time you need, but know this. If you decline, I fear we will lose everything. As she turned to leave, Darren watched her go. The weight of her request remained, heavy and unrelenting. He had spent years negotiating treaties, bringing peace to troubled planets. But never had he been asked to take such an enormous step, one that would not only change his life, but could very well alter the course of an entire galaxy. Darren was left standing in the quiet of his office, the silence broken only by the hum of the city beyond the palace walls. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the responsibility, but one thing was clear. The fate of the galaxy could rest on his decision. He only hoped he could find a way to balance the weight of leadership with his own sense of morality and duty. The next few days were filled with long hours of contemplation. He met with other diplomats, studied the history of the kingdom, and learned about Queen Allura's reign. She was a skilled ruler, beloved by her people, but there was a sense of uncertainty in the air, like a storm waiting to break. If Darren accepted, he would not only be marrying the queen, he would be stepping into a role he had never envisioned for himself. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the challenge he had been preparing for all along. And so, as the days passed, Darren knew that a decision had to be made. The galaxy needed a leader, and perhaps it was his turn to step up. Darren spent the following days in a haze of uncertainty. The weight of Princess Elijah's request continued to press on him, growing heavier with each passing hour. Every corner of the palace, every sound of the distant city, reminded him of the impossible decision he now faced. He knew that whatever choice he made, it would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire galaxy. He found himself in the quiet gardens of the palace one evening, the moonlight casting long shadows over the marble paths. The flowers here were unlike any he had seen before, their colors vibrant and strange, their scents sweet and unfamiliar. It was a beautiful, peaceful place, but it did little to soothe his troubled mind. Darren had always been a man of logic. He thrived on facts, on negotiation, on finding the right path through any problem. But this wasn't like anything he had encountered. This wasn't about numbers or treaties. It was about people, real, complex people, and the fate of their future. He hadn't spoken to Queen Allura since Elijah's request. She had been in meetings, preparing for the upcoming diplomatic summit, and Darren didn't know how to approach her. How did one speak to a queen about such a monumental decision? Would she welcome his help, or would she see his involvement as an intrusion? Darren couldn't help but wonder about the woman behind the title. He had heard much about Queen Allura, her wisdom, her strength, her ability to unite the galaxy despite countless challenges. But he had never seen her up close. He had only heard stories. Elijah, too, had spoken of her mother with such reverence, but there had always been a shadow of sadness in her eyes when she spoke of the queen's struggles. Darren was brought out of his thoughts by the soft rustle of footsteps. He turned to see Elijah approaching, her long, silver hair flowing in the evening breeze. She was alone, her expression as determined as ever, but there was a softness to her that Darren hadn't noticed before. "I didn't expect to find you here," Darren said, trying to mask the tension in his voice. Elijah smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the garden before locking onto his. "I thought you might need a moment away from the palace. There's a lot to think about, isn't there?" Darren sighed, looking down at his hands. "More than I can process in a day. I've been trying to figure out how to proceed. I know what you're asking me, but I don't know if I'm the right person for the job." Elijah stepped closer, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "You are the right person, Darren. I believe that with all my heart. You have the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to see things from a different perspective. My mother, she needs someone who isn't bound by the politics of this galaxy. She needs someone who can bring a new way of thinking, someone who can make difficult decisions, someone like you." Darren glanced at her, her words hanging in the air. He had always thought of himself as a diplomat, skilled in negotiation and persuasion. But this was different. Marrying a queen was one thing, but helping to rule an entire galaxy was a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for ruling anything," Darren admitted. "I've spent my life on the sidelines helping others come to agreements, but it's more than I ever imagined. What if I fail?" Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "You won't fail. You don't have to be perfect, Darren. You just have to be willing to try. My mother trusts you, and I do too. The galaxy needs a new leader, someone who can unite the people and heal the wounds that have torn us apart." Darren closed his eyes, trying to block out the swirling thoughts that threatened to overwhelm him. The idea of ruling a galaxy, of being married to Queen Allura, it felt impossible. But then again, wasn't that why he was here? To make the impossible happen. "I'll think about it," Darren said finally, though he knew deep down that the decision was already being made for him. There was no turning back now. If he was going to help save the galaxy, he had to take that first step, no matter how daunting it seemed. The next day, Darren was summoned to the Queen's private chambers. He had heard little of Queen Allura's personal life, but the rumors suggested she was a woman of great strength, one who had weathered countless trials with grace and dignity. When Darren entered her chambers, he was surprised by how calm and welcoming the space felt. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the galaxy's history, images of triumph, unity, and peace. But there were also scars in the fabric, areas where time had worn away the threads. It was a reminder of how fragile their unity had become. Queen Allura was seated at a large, ornate table, her hands folded in front of her. She looked up as Darren entered, her sharp, calculating eyes softening for a moment as she regarded him. "Darren," she said, her voice low and soothing, yet powerful. "I know why you're here." Darren nodded, taking a seat across from her. He had been briefed on her leadership, but now, seeing her in person, he felt the full weight of her presence. This was the woman who had led an entire galaxy, the one who had shaped the fate of so many lives. And yet, she seemed so alone. "I understand the request Elijah made," Darren began, trying to sound confident. "And I'm honored by it, but I must admit, I'm not sure I'm the right person to help lead your people." Queen Allura studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "You are not the first diplomat to be asked to take on this responsibility, but you are the first one to make me question if I've been ruling the right way. You see, Darren, leadership isn't just about making decisions. It's about understanding the hearts of the people you govern. And I've grown so absorbed in the politics, in the power struggles, that I've lost sight of the people I'm meant to protect." Darren shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of how to respond. He had always been a neutral party, observing the politics of other planets from a distance. But this was different. Queen Allura was speaking to him not as a monarch, but as a woman who had been carrying the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders for too long. I don't want to just rule, I want to rebuild. I want to bring the galaxy back to what it once was, united, strong, peaceful, but I cannot do it alone. Darren's heart pounded in his chest. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the cracks in her armor that she had carefully hidden from the world. This wasn't about power for her, it was about the survival of everything she had built. And suddenly, Darren knew. He knew what he had to do. "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady, despite the overwhelming responsibility that now lay before him. "I'll marry you. I'll stand beside you not as a ruler but as a partner. Together, we'll lead this galaxy." Queen Allura's eyes softened, and for the first time Darren saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." Darren nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was the moment that would define his life, and it would shape the future of the galaxy. There was no turning back now, but for the first time Darren didn't feel afraid. He felt ready.